So welcome to the podcast, and thank you for taking the time out today. Thank goodness it's April. It finally feels like there's a little bit of buzz in the air with a lineup of industry events and conferences. Are you attending any conferences this year?
Yeah, well, yes. Actually, I'm starting right at the beginning of April. The Insights Association is in Philly. April, I think it's 4th through 6th. So I'll be there. And then I'm going to IIEX in Austin. Excuse me. And then I head to the Wire Exec Summit in May.
Oh, yes, I've been hearing about the Wire Exec Summit. I myself, being a woman in research, have been following a lot of the events. And again, 2 years, it feels like it's gone by really quickly. And unfortunately, not a lot of us have been able to get together. So I bet you that's a pretty exciting event for you, being pretty involved with Wire, hey?
It is. I so look forward to it. It's 2 days, wonderful 2 days. The first is they talk about the head. The second day, it's about the heart. And, we welcome those women who are on a leadership track to join. So perhaps one day you will apply and join the leadership track. It's a wonderful experience. And, I can't say enough about Wire and what it's done for the women in our industry. So,
wow.
Yeah, think about that.
Yeah, no, wow, that's great. I'll definitely. It's such an interesting industry in terms of how like women are really about encouraging each other. Even founder-led organizations, still really playing the game with each other and recognizing that I feel like collaboration may be part of the new competition. So it's amazing to see. I love to see these events kind of going on. And again, spring really feels like that. Trade show kind of mile where everyone's attending a lot of these really exciting conferences and stuff. So that's really great to hear. But before we dive in, I would like to introduce myself. I am Sharday Torgerson, the creative and digital strategist at Insightrix Research in Saskatoon, Canada, and your season 3 host for Stories of Market Research. And I would like to welcome Anne Brown to the podcast. Anne Brown is the CEO and principal at Gazelle Global Research Services, an established leader and innovator in managing the logistics of research on a global scale. The people at Gazelle are the business leaders and innovators and research veterans, problem solvers, listeners, and advisors on the global scale. They are passionate about what they do, and they've built a network of people that bring the human approach to collaboration, all while addressing the challenges of today's marketers. So welcome to the podcast today, Anne.
Wow. Thank you.
It was a mouthful, but with 25 years in business on a global scale, I am sure I'm only kind of cracking the surface of some of the work that you guys do there. So
thank you for such a lovely introduction. So, Gazelle Global, we try to live up to our name. We're a global provider. And I think, that's some of the things that we'll be talking about today that I'm anxious to discuss with you.
Yeah. I think that's my problem. I'm a little anxious today. I'm really excited. I feel that spring in the air to some degree. Winter has been a long run season for a lot of us, I think. So, given the pandemic and other situations that I think we're dealing with on a global scale. So, as we dive in here, I think that's what we're talking about. The world has certainly gone what feels like through a transition in the last few years. Given so many issues that we're dealing with, facing as a society, we have everything from climate change to the pandemic, to civil unrest, to global conflict. And I feel like the research community has certainly noticed and is looking for ways to work together on this. And a question for you, Anne, how do you think perhaps market research is maybe coping with this as an industry? And what are you seeing as a leader in research on a global scale and how we're dealing with this?
Well, I think you hit one thing a few minutes ago when you said, it's been a long winter. I feel like it's been a 2-year winter in some ways, in that, we were just, the world was closed. I feel like the world for global research was closed for a couple of years. And we were just beginning to come out of it. We were seeing an uptick in international work in person, which really was mostly non-existent over the past couple of years. Internationally, in person was really down. And we just started working internationally in person again, and I was very excited by that. And I feel there's tremendous cooperation out there from the providers internationally, because everybody really wants to get back. Everybody wants to, make things into whatever the newest normal is going to be. And I just think it was a great time. And yet now we have this problem over in the Ukraine that is going to be it's affecting everything. I think it's going to affect everything. So, yes, what you said earlier, collaboration is the new competition. What they say, like the rising tide lifts all boats. So
Hmm.
I'm hoping that, with an opening now, with countries being more open and allowing in-person research, we'll get back to some sort of a new normal in terms of working globally.
Mm. Yeah, you make a really interesting point, and the Ukraine, excuse me, conflict is indeed a pretty troubling situation. We've all been watching the event kind of unfold, and even as researchers, we're asking ourselves, what can we be doing to help maybe contribute to providing more informative information, more factual information as we so do. In these trying times, people will turn to research often, and not only just for the data, it's for consulting, it's for problem solving, it's for listening, it's for advising. What impact on research do you think that we are seeing on a global scale due to this conflict? And do you have any maybe predictions on how this could influence our future as an industry?
I just think there's so much to say here. You, we're watching, and that's the other thing. We can watch everything now on the news.
Yeah.
So we're watching some of the biggest brands close their doors. They're walking out of Russia. And it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about the BRICS. We're not talking about them now, but we were talking about them. What is it, 5 years ago? Everybody was doing research in the BRICS. Russia was the R. So there was a lot of work, a lot of international global research being done in Russia. Um, and I think that, there'll be an effect on our major brands, because they have been forced to leave a country where they were doing, probably a lovely business. So I think there'll be an impact there. I think there'll be an impact in terms of the food supply, and the costs for food and fuel, because Ukraine was a big provider of wheat. So the cost for wheat is going to rise. So, you know, when inflation happens, when costs go up, the cost of fuel is crazy now. I was looking over the weekend, crude was $112 a barrel. Last couple of years ago, it was 30 something dollars a barrel. So, the costs are going to be affecting everybody, consumers, as well as brands. So, I think that's one side of it. The other side of it is that there are researchers in Russia. There are researchers in the Ukraine. So, earlier on this year, we saw bids for doing work in Russia. Well, that's not happening because there's no way that they could be paid now, because, a lot of the SWIFT is closed. And, feeling is that sanctions need to be laid upon Russia because of what Putin is doing in the Ukraine. So I think there'll be, a lot of repercussions. And we can't forget we have researchers in the Ukraine as well, and researchers throughout Europe. There are researchers in Poland. Poland has taken on, a
Hmm.
huge number of refugees. So, I think we're going to see an impact. So it's hard to think that now, after 2 years of being closed, now we have this terrible conflict that we have to face, and we have to live through, and um, continue carrying on.
It's a real attest to the impact on globalization. I think
Mhm.
often we've ignored how easy globalization has come over the past few decades, and how it's both contributed to our life, positively. For example, I live in a very prairie part of the world. I think access to many sorts of, say exotic fruits or imported goods that, normally wouldn't without globalization. I think we'll start to see a big impact in our supply chain, especially in given areas that are considered a lot more rural, perhaps to even places like New York, for example. But I think it's interesting to take a look at from a researcher's perspective, because I think we're all looking at it from, what should businesses maybe be doing more to ensure, that they kind of recognize market research and the value during these trying times. So do you have any suggestions for businesses that, might be still hesitant or on the fence given, the uncertainty? What would you have to give advice for those types of businesses?
Well, I think businesses always need to be aware of what how consumers feel, what's on their mind, and what are they willing to do, how are they willing to spend, and what are their feelings, and what is the mindset of the consumer these days. And I think it's very important to continue that research.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that's a continuous message for us as well, is that, really when the world is, dealing with certain things, research really is the one thing that responds to it in a really healthy way. And I think it's shown even during the pandemic. I think there was, for lack of a better term, a worry in the industry, like how are businesses and our clients going to respond to research, when we're all sending our staff and employees home, and really just ensuring that we're keeping the doors open again, for really a lack of a better term. It was such an uncertain time, March 2020 and on. We've seen, again, you mentioned that shift in consumerism, and the behavior was a direct impact of the pandemic. More people were online, as a direct result of that. And I love that you kind of have a little bit of a global lens on this, Anne, because I feel like maybe if we take a bit of a zoom out for a second and look at the world as if it were a community of consumers. And I've been looking at this for a few months now, even as a marketer myself in the market research industry, but we're always looking at what has the behaviors that have changed due to the direct impact of the pandemic, and how maybe have insights agencies have changed their approach to market research as a result.
Well, I think that one of the things that this has shown us is the importance of the direct communication with the consumer. So I think that that is priceless, as they say. Being able to talk to the consumer, I think, is just invaluable. And I think that in that light, there has been more qual, and I think there has been an uptake in qualitative research, and I think that's partly because there have been some quality issues with quantitative work, and I think that brands and end users, client side researchers are, after this time of being closed out from communication with the consumer, I think that they are hungry for that communication, that in-person communication that they would have in a qual environment. So I think that qualitative research is on the rise, and I think that in-person research, research for those in actually speaking to people who are in populations that are not easy to reach quantitatively, I think online, I think that in-person work is going to be on the rise.
Mm. It's an interesting point, and I feel, again, given the pandemic, there has been this constant conversation about in-person research? Is it something that we are going to continue to see a real need for? And I think that narrative shifted quickly, but it also shifted back to the fact that you will always inherently need in-person research, and online will never fully replace that need, and for some of the reasons you just gave. And I think we'll kind of dive a little bit more into that, because totally agree on that front. And I think, maybe if we back up a little, because I really love this whole aspect about how qual really came into play during the pandemic as a really strong form of methodology for us to kind of use and start to apply to some projects and look for unique ways of getting in front of people and still getting some actionable insights to our clients. So a question for you: what are then some maybe advantages of qualitative research in ways that maybe businesses can still get the research that they need, while perhaps their look at market research is a little bit more traditional in form?
During the pandemic, qual was in trouble because no one could meet in person, so the focus facilities were very hard hit by the closures. And I think that they pivoted so quickly. They did such a good job pivoting online. So they still had those intimate conversations, IDIs, those one-on-one talks with all kinds of people, not just consumers, but with industry leaders, with thought leaders. And, I think that was the great pivot of the pandemic, qual going online. And I think that it's still, that's going to continue. I think that cost wise, and I think that room was made for that, and now it's going to remain. But I do think that we're going to also go back to in-person focus groups again. Now that the world is opening up, clients in the back room, they want to see their consumers. They want to be, they want to be watching. They want to be hearing. They want to see. They want the visuals. They want to see the facial expressions and all the rest. The interaction in a group. So I think that's that is going to be back. And I think in person is going to be back also. Actually having people on the ground in faraway places, doing the real work that we've been doing for many years is going to be back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I feel, again, with the uncertainty of how perhaps market research would conduct certain projects, I think there may have been a worry, but in all retrospect, it was a great time to innovate and ideate as an industry, rather. I think it was at a time where a lot of folks were really exploring qualitative research as a part of their industry, as a much more traditional aspect of the industry, where I feel as if maybe in the past qualitative was always looked at as a bit more of an experiment or an add-on, or something a little bit more on the social side or the arts side or something. But I really appreciate that we have come a long way as an industry in recognizing like how cool, we can ideate around certain types of qualitative projects, and how maybe we can do that online. But and then all retrospect as well, how important quantitative is as well, to really make sure that we see the whole picture, because qualitative helps you again really zoom out and maybe understand some of those questions, the whys, the who's, the hows. But then really making sure that we're, following it up with a really great quantitative study.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing where they both play an important role. I love to see that the industry is taking notice and businesses are looking at doing things different. So that leads me maybe even back to your experience and, what types of methodologies are being explored more or less. We talked about maybe online being something that we're calling the great pivot. I love that. That's a great quote. What, in your experience, how have we seen perhaps businesses adapt even on the client side in terms of working more online? Do you feel, in your perspective, that the industry is responding in a way where people can still, get what they need out of qualitative research?
I think that research, that the whole menu of research is the same. Just some of the levels have changed. We have more online now than we've had years ago, because now we have more, with internet penetration, such as it is, there is much more mobile. So a lot of places in the world, research is going to be quantitative research is going to be on mobile. That's just the way it's going to be.
Good
Um,
point.
yeah. So I think that, in that regard, online will be increasing. Um, I think that we will be constantly monitoring, as we do at Gazelle, and as all of my colleagues do in their respective firms. We're going to be, on top of the quality issues of quant. Um, you know, Monitoring those surveys, and trying to be one step ahead of the fraudsters. It's top of mind to all of us. So, we're out there doing that. But, you're still going to have, in person is still going to be real, because there are a lot of populations that you can't reach, um, via, via online. There are still places in the world where you need to make an appointment to talk to someone. So, that's going to continue. And, I think that, again, as I said before, direct contact with consumers is important. And there is still, believe it or not, some research that's done on the telephone.
Hmm.
So, I think all of the methodologies that we use, are all going to be at play. Just the levels are going to keep changing, and they're going to keep changing based on what's culturally acceptable in the places where we're working. What's the right way to get to, what's the best method to get to the people that you want to talk to? That's the way we want to do it, because that's going to get the best responses, the most rich data for our clients. That's, you know, so I think if the levels are just going to keep changing, and they're going to keep changing based on what the best methodology is at the moment.
It's amazing how we used to really look at multimodal surveys or research as one of two things. And now, I mean, there's many ways to really tap into
Yeah.
getting in front of a survey participant.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a really good point. I love that. But I think we're also really diving into a bit of an area also that is often a challenge among researchers. And it's, we're even looking at how businesses operate as a whole. So, when we talk about the last even decade, we got younger folks who are leading in terms of social causes. And honestly, they've done a really fantastic job at keeping brands accountable, even in terms of representation. So you have market research as an industry who, have really tapped into this to make sure that we are, conducting research in a manner that is ethical, but also is really inclusive of everyone. And we keep talking about how, online research is super important, to, qualitative methodologies and getting in front of certain folks. But, it's not also something that everyone has access to. Internet enabled technology is still very much, privilege in society, although the mindset is changing among governments of the world, recognizing how important that need is. But I think, what we're talking about is, this level of how research professionals should respond to ensure that they're conducting research in a way that, we're getting in front of these individuals who preach, the importance of, eliminating bias in research. So my question for you, Anne, is how can maybe these insights professionals conduct better quantitative or qualitative data, and try to reach low incidence populations to ensure that they're, providing inclusivity in their research?
Yeah, I think it's so important today that we be aware of, um, making sure that our research is, not biased. So I think, we have to look at oversampling, some of the underserved populations, so that when we're doing our research, we have levels, of responses that are readable. When you look at the low population levels of um, certain members of our population, the levels are too low to have a good readable base in, a sample size of, let's say, 800 or 1,000. So, we need to look to, oversampling underserved populations. when we're doing our work if you want to get a good read.
How can maybe sample providers or, research providers as a whole, ensure that they're doing so?
Well, I think it's all about the sampling. I think that you just have to be careful. Just put a little thought into, um, the research that you're doing and making sure that you have a sound sample base. You know, it comes at the very beginning. It comes at the bid time. When you're looking for
Absolutely.
a cost. You need to you know put those that information forth to the person that you're asking a price for. To make sure that the quotas that you're looking for are priced out properly, and that when the study starts, you're going to meet the quotas that you set. So I think it's very important.
Hmm. It's really key insight, I think, for individuals who are in the market research field. I think even living in the prairies ourselves, we experience this often remark where our prairie sample is but condensed into 3 provinces. And I feel as if our sample in Saskatchewan, if you will, central Canada, even if we have a very similar mindset to other provinces, no one individual is the same. I'm sure in Alberta, our neighboring province, and then Manitoba, our other neighboring province. I find it often ironic that there is that assumption that, to meet the quota or the requirements that, we can kind of lump the sample into, one essential prairie sample. But we, even as a business, recognize that is not how it should operate. So we make sure, as a Saskatchewan business with our grassroots here, that when we're doing projects that are specific to our clients' needs in Saskatchewan, that we do not wrap up our sample base with other provinces, that we're very specific, even other provinces having their own sample base. But, geographically, demographically, I think there's even more to this. It's even deeper where, again, we were kind of talking about the younger demographic, really understanding the need for, ethical research. But at the same time, younger people also have a different expectation in how to participate in research. So while we're trying to get in front of these demographics, these hard to reach segments, I'm wondering, what should we do as market research agencies to ensure that we're getting in front of populations, that we're gathering rich insights, but in a way that they expect? So as a market research firms, we're oversampling, but as a user who might, come across our market research, what are they expecting from us, and what should we maybe be doing differently or the same of?
Well, I think we have to be aware that so much research is now being done via mobile. I think that's very important for us to recognize, and that mobile needs to be included in, mobile sample needs to be included in all of our projects. Absolutely. And I think then once you have that, you need to face the fact that there are certain things that you have to be cognizant of. You have to be cognizant of the length of the interview. It has to be mobile ready. And the questions have to be engaging. You just have, you need to have a study that's concise and that's engaging, that's keeping the respondent engaged. So you can't expect to do a 20-minute survey on a mobile device. It just gets to be too long. You're not going to be able to hold anyone's attention for that much time on a mobile device. So I think these are things that have to be considered as you go forward, especially when you're looking to reach the younger population.
I hate to use this as a term. Hate's a strong word. It's a funny term at best, but I really explore this emphasis on TikTok being a strategy. We so far have come along to appreciating video as a form of content that I think visually we get a lot of stimulation out, a lot of visual learners learn from, and then a lot of advertisement can actually turn into content. But if you look at the trajectory of a video, a 20-minute video, slowly became a 14-minute video, became an 8-minute video, and now we're down to 5 or less. If lucky, you're producing a 5-minute video that people are watching. I'll say 90 seconds is where we're at. But I think the whole idea around that is really that time is way more important than ever. And the currency exchange between a participant and a researcher is that time. So if we're not looking at it from the aspect of that participant really, we can provide them with all the incentives, the prizes of the world, but really their currency in terms of time is what's most important to them. I think that is really true with younger folks. I think that's even more true with the pandemic, what we're dealing with as a society. We're all looking at our own time as the most important currency. So one would say that the TikTok strategies is really recognizing how we can get in front of, these folks with great attention, at the same time not taking up too much of their time, and then hopefully getting a mutual exchange out of it. So I think there's some really interesting added benefits to looking at how social media is maybe, working with younger generations, how they're getting content or how people are using social media. And I would almost argue that that's where the mobile comes in, is social media and mobile really are becoming, both huge parts of our routines in society, whether I guess we kind of like it or appreciate it or not. Even on the research side, social media can often look at like a monster or kind of a little bit of a villain, when in retrospect, it's been an absolutely fantastic recruitment and marketing tool for us, given how things have changed. But I think to maybe even reel back a little bit to that, we've been talking about hard to reach populations, and often they are experiencing barriers as a result. So we looked at even online being one. So on one hand, folks are looking at as online is a really easy way to get in front of participants. But even now we're working at Insightrix on a project where we're actually putting up flyers in clinics to actually get in front of a certain hard to reach segment, because that is really the only way you can. And we're providing them with a direct number with, information about a real researcher so that they can actually connect with them. So there really isn't, a be all end all solution for online. So these hard to reach segments are experiencing, I think, more than just those types of barriers. I think another one even is language. Language is a huge barrier to research. And I'm sure as an expert on the global scale and, providing international research, this obviously is a common challenge to ensure that data collection is, wrapping up all the cultural context, the nuances and the intent of the problem that's been represented. So if you were to give advice to researchers who are working on that international level to ensure that they're making, the most out of the research, given perhaps a language barrier, do you have any advice for those individuals?
You've touched on one of my biggest pet peeves in the industry, and that is translations. Oh my goodness. I cannot stress it enough that surveys need to be translated into the language into the in-country language. I mean,
Yes.
that's the only way to get a really rich response from the respondents. And also think about it. It's insulting to not translate the questionnaire into the respondent's language. It's rude. It's insulting. And also, think about it, if you're bilingual, okay, yeah, many of them are bilingual, but they're not going to be able to converse as easily, as casually, with the most feeling unless they're in their native language. So
Yeah.
I just can't stress it enough. Studies, globally, they need to be translated into the native language. And so what if you have to translate it into 5 languages in some countries? So what? That's what you do if you want to get a good response. That's the way it is. You can't skimp on this. It's so important. And I also feel that it's important to, when you're doing open-end coding, to code in language for the richest response. You need somebody who's a native speaker who will just read through that and understand, all the nuances. They'll understand, the phraseology. They'll just understand what the respondent is getting at. So yes, that's my rant.
Very passionate about it. Honestly, it's really true. And I find it ironic that, English as a first language, it's often misinterpreted in a way that it's a universal language. And let's be honest, English is far from a universal language. And I
Mhm.
think to really understand that is a valuable part of being an international researcher. Granted, even doing research at home in Canada, we call ourselves a melting pot. Even central Canada, we're home to many populations. And recognizing that if you really want to do, say, researchers with newcomers or recent immigrants, that to really recognize what that research survey looks like to whom you're doing the research with. So, I mean, and again, I think this kind of touches a little bit on the whole aspect of diversity on your research team, right? And I think yourself as a CEO and a principal, for a international research firm, again, you really, I'm sure, appreciate how to approach new talent to ensure that there is diversity on your firm. We're seeing it everywhere. Lots of folks within the industry are recognizing how important it is for this reason. But do you have perhaps any foundational, perhaps tips for organizations that may be looking to expand on their own team, especially if they're looking to expand on their research capabilities on an international level?
Well, I think one thing that's popped up in the past few months actually is the Insights Association has established the Ideator um, uh, program, let us say, where and a lot of the very large research firms have just hopped onto this. So what they're doing is they're creating an um, internships with it, where they're going. So they're going to um, they're recruiting people from underserved populations, and they are recruiting them into research positions at a lot of the larger firms. A lot of the firms have already hopped onto this, and I think it's going to be a great program for getting people in underserved populations interested in our industry. I somehow think that um, even today, people don't really know that much about our industry. I don't think they're aware that it is a wonderful industry where we're studying. I think maybe the word research scares people away, but where we're studying so many diverse and interesting things, and where we're talking to people all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
What an enormous privilege it is to be in this industry, to be able to talk to people throughout the world, to learn about how they feel, what they think. Um, it, it's a wonderful industry, I'm very excited about this Ideator program from the Insights Association. I think it's going to pave the way for young people to move into this industry from populations that are underserved. So I think it's a great new thing.
I think anyone that is really naturally curious would do well in the market research or insights industry. You so often hear when people mention, especially career long market research professionals, how did you get into market research? And often they never know, or at the very least, they never know how and why they ended up there. And I kind of love that about the industry, because I think even being curious about market research itself is often why folks end up in the profession that they do. And then because, as you mentioned, we get such a privilege to really be. I mean, gatekeeper is maybe not the most, it's a bit strong language to say, but gatekeepers of information, I think, is really, it's kind of a cool, maybe a little bit sci-fi type aspect to it. I mean, nerd in me, but I do love that whole aspect. And as a young woman within my career as well, I really do appreciate the ability to innovate every day and come up with cool and exciting solutions. And it's so awesome when you have a client that wants to innovate right along with you, and the really unique things and the partnership that comes out of it. So I don't want to say there have been silver linings in the past 2 years, and I know we're dealing with a lot as an industry, but also a world, as a society. But I always, and maybe I'm glass half full type person, but I still feel like research is a really strong industry that will really carry, I think, a lot of our clients' needs forward. Just in, even just if it's a comfort aspect, consulting and advice goes a long way right now, and getting quick advice, ensuring that our clients are making better decisions just based off of the small things that we're working on, even what we talked about today. I think the pandemic has allowed a lot of us, even individually and maybe as an industry, to look inwards. And here's an example where we're looking at better ways to ensure that we're reaching hard to reach segments. Because we've all been kind of a little bit forced, for lack of a better term, online. And here we are still ensuring and looking for ways to make sure that we're performing research without bias and still getting it in front of our clients. So we could probably talk about this topic all day because it's such an important, part of the industry. And we're always trying to ensure that, the quality remains intact. And I think you even made a couple points around that online does provide challenges to market research with, ensuring that we're validating appropriate, users and participants of the research, that we're doing our vetting and background checks and et cetera. So again, there's lots that we can unpack today, but I really do appreciate you for being on the podcast. And I think there's room for us to continue, and maybe we'll have you on again and really kind of explore around the diversity in research. I think that is such a unique topic as well. I think a lot of the industry is really finding, ways to support both their research service team as well as their clients. And again, that collaboration aspect, I think even outside of hiring, outsourcing is another example, which I know even yourself is really privy to why that is important to us as an industry. So I think if I were to leave the floor to you, is there anything that you would like to kind of share, land on, and the conversation on, anything exciting going on that you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to first to thank you for this great opportunity to talk to you, for your listeners to hear my point of view. What a great privilege it is. That's the other thing. What a great privilege it is to work in this industry of ours. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been through a lot of changes in the industry, a lot of pivots, and I still love what I do. So, there it is for all of those young people who want to do something that they'll really love. Come to market research. So that's one thing that I'd like to leave you with. Thank you so much for Sharday for giving me this opportunity. But the other thing that I want to remember today is I want to remember the people of the Ukraine. I think it's so important for us to support them, and to support them in any way that we can. I just hope that we come to some sort of a conclusion to this the horrible events there, and remember the people of Ukraine, and also remember our women in research. Here we are, you and I. So I think we were an underserved population as well. So I think that the fact that we get to do this every day is a wonderful privilege. So again, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate being on with you today.
Thank you, Anne. And to end, I will provide some well-deserved links in the description below. You can also donate to the Ukrainian Red Cross, that we will provide a link as well. At Insightrix Research, we are currently working with our Sasquatch research panel and our panel members to match donations for the Ukrainian Red Cross efforts. So I will also provide a link for Sasquatch members that may be listening. And yes, I 100% agree. If we can just always make sure that, recognizing what's going on in the world, research is a really important part of that. I know even as an industry, we're also looking at how some other folks are doing research in Ukraine, and we're looking at how we can support those individuals. I know we're ourselves as a podcast, we're looking at trying to get the folks that have been doing in-field research actually in Ukraine to see if there's a possibility that we can get their story out there. So it's such an interesting time. So anything that we can kind of do to keep things relevant, keep the conversation going, whatever platform that is, I think we have to. So I appreciate that, Anne. And let's have you back sometime soon. I think there's obviously lots to talk about as women in research. So I welcome any woman back to come in and share some of their thoughts. So thanks again.
Thank you, Sharday. Have a great day.
You too.